Dr. Stephen Greer was the founder of the Disclosure Project and what came to be known as the CE5 Initiative. The Disclosure Project was something that culminated in May 9th, 2001, Washington Press Club Conference, where I think at that presentation, there were 12 whistleblowers that had firsthand experience that were exposed to the UFO program, who were people who were military contractors or intelligence officers. And they, in some way, shape, or form during their service, had encountered the UFO subject, whether it be the reporting of UFOs, seeing an actual UFO themselves, witnessing people hiding it from the government, and all kind of things like that. So we wouldn't be where we are today. There would be no ATIP probably, or OSAP, or To the Stars, if it wasn't for the early work that Dr. Stephen Greer did. And, Dr. Stephen Greer early on had a lot of support from really deep insiders. He had Dr. Edgar Mitchell on side, the sixth man to walk on the moon. He had a military advisor, Commander Will Miller, who was a Navy commander, who was somebody who was actually in, and he can't really say this himself too forwardly, but the guy ran an unacknowledged special access program. Dr. Stephen Greer was talking about unacknowledged special access programs in 92, 93, in the 90s, right? The only person who really took note of that has in the history of UFOs prominently had been Richard Dolan, who reported it in his books, UFOs in the National Security State. But other than that, we did not hear that term until Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, and these people started coming forward in 2017, so 30 years later almost. And that is where these programs reside pretty much. They've gotten the new kind of label, legacy programs. That's what they call them within the intelligence community and whatnot. But again, for his time, Dr. Stephen Greer was a pioneer, trailblazer. He also is a highly controversial individual. He's burned every bridge he's touched. So on a personality level, he's very troublesome. So that's a real deal. But also you have to understand when he was doing what he was doing. So Dr. Stephen Greer got a briefing. He sat down with the sitting CIA, not former, the sitting CIA director for Clinton. And there's a paper trail which talks about how they're setting this meeting up. And John Peterson of the Arlington Institute is the one who set that up. So he got meetings with the J2, Admiral Tom Wilson, which is very important because the Admiral Tom Wilson, Eric Davis notes. I can go on and on about he got a meeting with the sitting DIA director, Patrick Hughes, in 98. The guy, so when you hear him say that he had a meeting with such and such, it happened. He has his own. So when you listen to Stephen Greer, you have to understand you're listening to Stephen Greer. So he won't flat out lie per se, but he has his spin on it, right? Which is his perspective of what happened. And so you have to see that there's areas of gray there. But if he says that he had a meeting with such and such or so and so, that more than likely that actually had happened. So it's a nuanced conversation. It's not black and white. He strayed very far from the work that he had once done. He's kind of off the deep end. He's brought forward a lot of unvetted or unverifiable whistleblowers where their testimony's not even too important or confusing. But you got to understand, right, that this guy was a civilian in the 1990s when this was not safe to do. It literally was not safe to do. I mean, you heard what happened to David Grush and all these people, even Lou Elizondo, there's retaliation. This dude was a civilian in the 90s doing it when it wasn't not cool to do it. And he definitely got mixed up with some people. And there's a term called targeted individuals. This dude was no doubt put on some kind of list for surveillance and being a targeted individual. So again, that literally that's like a whole podcast within itself to try to break down. But listen to everything he says, listen with a grain of salt, compare it to other information, because you'll hear people like Lou or Jim or anybody. I'm not, and I'm not just trying to single them out. I'm just saying there's people in the Invisible College, Jacques Vallée and whatever, and Hal Putoff, and guess what? They all hate him, and for a ton of reasons. There's an adversarial component.
He made up some stuff about Putoff too, didn't he? At one point.
Yes, right. So that again, that's a very complicated situation, and I'm not going to say that he made that up. He heard that somewhere, so you have to understand where he heard that from. And it's not for me to speak about, but there's probably more to that story than people understand, and that's getting beyond what I really can publicly discuss.
And as far as what Lou has been saying about Steven, like orchestrating flares being dropped and so forth for CE5, I know you've had some legitimate CE5 experiences, and you're not saying that it can happen only with Greer, I guess, where Greer is kind of more about the money side of it, I guess. Maybe you
Nowadays,
could
he is,
explain the
yeah.
difference.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, man. Each one of these questions is like a whole podcast, seriously. And I've been out with Dr. Stephen Greer for those events, and I can tell you, as somebody who has experienced genuine anomalous contact experiences before and after those events, at least the ones I went to, were the real deal. And what most people don't realize nowadays, people might hear the name Christopher Bledsoe. He's this famous experiencer now, and he's been put on a pedestal in some way because the intelligence community has backed them and he's cooperated with them. Okay. And because of that cooperation, he has their support and validation. What people don't realize is Dr. Stephen Greer was the Christopher Bledsoe of the 90s. Okay. There were intelligence people coming to his events and validating and verifying and all this, but Dr. Stephen Greer was not playing nice. Dr. Greer was basically like, F all you people. I'm going to do what I believe and how I think it should be done. And, for better or worse, right? Maybe if he cooperated, it would have gotten us further, or it would have kept them on a better track. I don't know. I kind of think like things happen the way they should have. But when it comes to CE5, yeah, that flare thing, it's a highly questionable thing. The video that Greer shows, those are flares. There's no question in my mind. They appear and disappear and float in the wind. They behave in every action that a flare. Now, did he orchestrate that? Could be, right? Could he be at desperate times and he did that? Could be. I really don't know, but in the early 90s, and you can speak to, there's dozens and dozens and dozens, there's probably hundreds of witnesses at the very least. I mean, a lot of them have passed away by now, but there's definitely many that I'm in contact with who will tell you in the 1990s, Dr. Stephen Greer was a UFO magnet. He seems to have lost his touch in that sense, maybe because he lost his way. I don't know. But just like Christopher Bledsoe was having all this anomalous phenomena around him, and many others who don't talk about it, that Dr. Stephen Greer really was the real deal in that CE5 regard. And I like that Stephen Greer created a structured way to look at contact with non-human intelligence. And the structure of it is kind of, it's a fail-safe way. So CE5 is not limited to Stephen Greer CE5 protocols, but the CE5 protocols do work to anybody who's like genuinely putting in the time and effort to do it. However, there's what we call CE5, or intentional contact with non-human intelligence, has been going on for thousands of years. As far back as you go into human history, basically every major religion that you can look at has stories about humans interacting with non-human intelligence. So interactions with non-human intelligence is a very human thing. It's a very human capability. It's not limited to one method. anybody can do it who's sincere. There's going to be people that it's harder for. There's going to be people that just have a knack for it, and they're naturals for whatever reason. Just like anybody could be a natural at basketball or wrestling or whatever. And some people just like, they're not really built that way, you know. Just like I'm not built for whatever certain things, you know. I'm not an engineer. I can't build things and put them together. But when it comes to things like C5s, like, yeah, I could do that. It comes kind of natural to me.